Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we will answer your questions on history, on current events, on culture, on anything except how the Oakland Raiders could miss the playoffs 13 straight seasons, because that one is off limits.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Here's one question about something completely different, and it comes to us from Andrew, and he says, it seems that the continuous increases in government spending as percentage of GDP are unsustainable. What does history teach us will happen? Can history predict when this will happen?
It is unsustainable. There's an economic law named for Herb Stein, who was once chairman of Richard Nixon's Council of Economic Advisors, but don't hold it against him. And it says trends that can't continue won't. And the short answer to your question is this will stop when interest rates rise, because we're currently in a period of abnormally low interest rates, which is done deliberately on purpose by governments. It's meant to stimulate the economy by making us all borrow things we can't afford to pay back, including them. And right now, government payments on debt are just manageable. They're starting to creep up above the level of a lot of programs. But because interest rates are so low, the federal government is only on the hook for around $30 billion a year. If interest rates double, it's $60 billion. And suddenly, all that program spending has got to be hacked to bits in order to preserve solvency. Many of the provinces are in even worse condition. But I think there's a more profound answer to your question, because this phenomenon really puzzles me. Government in the 19th century in the English-speaking world took about 10% of GDP. And at that time, people lived with genuine economic hardship. They really were short of everything from food to clothing to shelter. We now live in a society that is mind-bogglingly prosperous. The average teenager today is richer than the Sun King, Louis XIV. Louis didn't have earbuds. He didn't have athletic sneakers. He was lucky if he had an indoor toilet. He certainly didn't have a computer, didn't have any of that stuff. And yet we've become so rich that poor people are suffering from an obesity crisis, and government keeps getting bigger in order to meet our needs. How could our needs be expanding so drastically? There's something totally intellectually out of whack about this. And at some point we're going to realize that government is actually squishing the economy. It's making us poorer, not richer. It's making us less healthy rather than more healthy. And this continual increase in the government share of our income, everything from income tax to sales tax to property tax to fees, they're getting you coming, they're getting you going, they're biting you here, they're biting you there. At some point, we won't be able to afford it, and we'll suddenly realize it wasn't even worth having in the first place. I think the trigger will be a rise in interest rates, but there's no question government has become irrationally huge, and it's time we started saying we don't need you taking over any more of our lives.
So you say when the interest rates start going up, that would be the trigger. Do you have any idea when that will be?
The United States Federal Reserve has already raised interest rates for the first time in nearly a decade. It's the first time since the 2008 financial crisis. The Canadian government hasn't done it yet, and the head of the IMF has just warned governments not to raise interest rates because people have borrowed too much money. But the whole point of low interest rates was to have people borrow money, and as long as interest rates stay that low, people are going to keep borrowing money because keeping interest rates low makes borrowing cheap. So will governments. My guess is things are going to be worrying by the end of 2016, and it's going to be panic stations by mid-2017, because once it starts, there's another economic law from Rudy Dornbush, who said that in economics, things take longer to happen than you thought they could, and then they happen faster than you thought they could.
So to ask a very practical question, say you're somebody, a youngish person in early 30s, say you have a decent job, you make okay money, and you think your job is fairly secure as these things go. What should you not do to avoid being the sucker at the bottom that's going to get washed over completely by this crisis?
The same thing Adam Smith said you shouldn't do. Do not live on borrowed money. He said that what is prudence in the affairs of a family can scarcely be folly in those of a kingdom. Do not live beyond your means. And try very hard to vote for political parties who understand how bad it was last time this happened, which, remember, was under Brian Mulroney. Interest rates got to be equal almost a half of program spending.
I remember that.
Why would we want to go through that again as politicians or as citizens? But even if you can't stop governments, pay off your credit card bills, the whole balance every month. Do not borrow, and above all, do not borrow to buy liabilities. If you must borrow, borrow to buy assets, and think hard about what you're buying and decide, is it going to make money for me or cost me money?
So the big shiny car, that's how?
The big shiny car is out.
If I can't afford it.
So is the big shiny barbecue. So is the big shiny
How about the big boat and the vacation?
The big shiny computer. Yep.
That's going to be hard.
Don't do it. Count the big pile of shiny money instead. It'll make you happy.
All right. Well, thanks for that, folks. If you want to play along, look on your screen. There's the URL that will lead you to the page where the explanation is about how you get to ask questions of the professor. Thanks. See you next time.